most anticipated car of the year, and yet one whose much delayed launch is slowly becoming a total buzzkill. While Ford has finally announced a launch date next week, let us bring you the details as promised on the diesel EcoSport. Ample specs? You bet, though a 6-speed manual gearbox would have really hit the spot. The car is energetic, but in city traffic you get a little bit tired of the frequent gear changes, and so I still believe that the 1-litre petrol EcoBoost will impress you just a little bit more. But now that we have this car, I also want to address all the queries that you've been sending me on it. But what about the inevitable face-off that's waiting to happen? Yes, it's gonna be a clash of the titans, alright. The immensely popular Duster, CNB's car of the year, will be the big rival for the EcoSport.
In terms of looks, the Duster is certainly the butch, the manly, sort of chunky looking, very much SUV looking car of the two. And you know what? I think that's what's worked for it, right? It's not just the pricing, it's also the fact that it's nice and wide and chunky looking. The EcoSport, by comparison, is a lot more contemporary, a lot more urban looking, and of course this face will also appeal to a lot of people. The part that surprised me is that before putting these two cars next to each other, I had really expected the EcoSport to look a lot tinier than the Duster. So it's surprising that in terms of just overall size and bulk, it manages to just about hold its own against that car.
Yes, I'd have initially guessed that looks would be the EcoSport's preserve, while the Duster would really score on size. Who really knew, eh? Well, now let's compare the drive and ride. Both cars with us today are diesel, of course. A quick reminder of the now famed DCi engine from Renault. It is also ample, reliable and hardy, with a surprisingly smooth and easy-to-use drivetrain.
There's a sense of grunt. You hear the engine, of course, a lot more, but it's not just that. Overall, you get this big brute sort of a feel from the Duster in comparison to the EcoSport. Almost a little bit unrefined, if you will, but not in a way that puts you off. Now, the car is surprisingly nice to drive. It is comfortable, it's easy, and it maneuvers really well. Has a car-like feel to its drive, and yet you have a nice commanding SUV-like position. So it's a good blend of being a brute and yet being a city car. And I think that's what people have liked about the Duster. Handling is also surprisingly good, not too much roll, and the gear shifts, the overall kind of sense of power you get from the engine, those are its attributes that I think have become its USPs.
So it's a tame beast that fits the bill as a city car too. Now back to the EcoSport.
There's a certain sense of refinement that I said perhaps wasn't there in the Duster. You definitely get it here on the EcoSport. Now, we've already told you what we think of the handling and the overall ride and performance feel on the 1-litre EcoBoost engine. I can tell you the diesel is also fun. It's also sporty and it's also fairly athletic. On the Fiesta, the same engine had a very slight sense of lag in the lower gears and especially at lower RPMs. You don't get that on this, and so which is what I think has been worked on. So full marks to Ford engineers on that. Also the way it's been mated to the gearbox, again it's a similar unit, similar package, but it seems to work better on the EcoSport. So good to see that the diesel is also fun. It's also sort of, you know, a sporty package, just like the 1-litre EcoBoost was. And well, the fact that you also have a few gadgets thrown in, you're surrounded by a slightly more plush interior, well, that adds to it, doesn't it?
The EcoSport has a good driving position, but clearly doesn't otherwise feel as SUV-ish to drive as the Duster.
It's no surprise really that the sense of space you get from the cabin of the Duster is a lot better than the EcoSport. Better headroom, better legroom and a much wider seat. So you put 3 adults here, it's not going to be as tight to squeeze as it is on the EcoSport. And you know what? There's another big advantage here. You get this rear AC vent. Such a big deal here in India, right? For sure. And you also get this drop-down armrest. Not much of a feature really if you think about it, but when it's not there, you do miss it. And I remember saying that even when we drove the EcoSport 1-litre, and especially on highway drives. You know, this adds a little level of comfort, something that you need, I think, in these cars, and it's surprising that the EcoSport doesn't have it. What is nicer about the EcoSport's cabin is that it's a lot more plush, a lot more contemporary looking. This one looks a little drab by comparison.
Yes, indeed it does. The Microsoft-developed Sync voice-guided system in the EcoSport is a bit complicated, but it certainly is a USP. Even the music system has a way better sound quality than the Dusters. But the top-end Duster has navigation now, while also offering Bluetooth and easy-to-access controls behind the steering wheel. A quick price check on the Duster. I do believe the EcoSport needs to just undercut these prices, which anyway have steadily gone up over the past few months. Which brings me to the larger point of the price points that I think that the EcoSport should, and yes, I'm saying should, launch with next week. While the top end should indeed combat the Duster, the entry pricing should take on the large premium hatchback. This could be a master stroke from Ford, one that will trouble the likes of the very popular Hyundai i20.
Now, a lot of purists are going to cry bloody murder, saying, hang on, what are you doing? Comparing a hatch with an SUV? Well, this is not really an SUV, but you get the reason why I say that. Now, the buyer doesn't think that way. And it's the beauty of the positioning, if you will, for Ford, the big advantage for Ford, where this car can actually attract people from both ends of its segment, and so which is why it becomes relevant to talk about the i20. Now, had Ford been brave enough to bring in, and perhaps even logical enough to bring in the Fiesta hatch, I do believe the i20 would have really faced a lot of heat, because the Fiesta hatch has just done so well globally. It works beautifully as a package. We have showed it to you on the program as well, but waste of time, because that car isn't coming here anytime soon. And even now, if Ford changes its mind, I do believe there is a market for the Fiesta hatch, because look at the kind of success that the i20 has had. Why is that? You get a large, ample hatch, which is spacious and roomy, which is well appointed, which gives you lots of options. And mind you, it is the rather fully loaded variants that have actually ended up doing well. And it is the top-end variants that we are comparing to the EcoSport, because that's the buyer who might say that, hang on, maybe I want to spend just a little bit more. Maybe I want to look at a slightly different appeal and get into something which looks bigger, more contemporary, and of course appeals to that almost obsessive Indian sensibility of wanting to own an SUV. In terms of size, of course this car is taller, but you can see that it's not a whole lot bigger. In fact, if anything, the i20 starts to look almost the same length as the EcoSport does. And in terms of cabin space also, I think the two are fairly evenly matched. In terms of equipment, the Sync system on the EcoSport certainly goes ahead. But why am I doing all the talking? Let's get inside and give you some of these details.
That's right, the i20, the Polo GT et al. Will face some heat now, as for the very first time, they might be cannibalized by an indirect rival. As interiors go, the i20's cabin is reasonably well appointed. The plastics aren't great for sure, but you get a decent amount of equipment, including keyless entry and start, reverse camera, etc. The diesel i20 has been the best seller for sure. A quick reminder on its specs. The CRDI motor has served well. Power and torque are similar to the EcoSport TDCi, but it is the 6-speed gearbox. That's a great step up.
The thing with the i20 is that the engine's ample enough. It's a comfortable enough drive. The car is very easy to drive, but when it comes to handling, it's not too sporty. Steering wheel's all right, it's reasonably precise, but there isn't very much of a dynamic feel to this car. So it's not boring exactly, but yes, when you compare to something like the Swift, the i20 was never one of those that seemed like a fun to drive or a driver-oriented car. And I think that's where the big difference lies between this and the EcoSport, because despite the tall height of the EcoSport, it is definitely a lot more fun to drive. There's also a little bit of lag that creeps in, especially at lower RPMs here on this engine. The CRDI otherwise is a very effective motor, but yes, I think that lag is again something that goes a little bit against it. And so yeah, on the overall driving experience, I have to say the EcoSport definitely stays ahead.
And finally, a quick scan of the prices for the diesel i20 variants tells you that this isn't a cheap car by any means, and yet also shows you the chasm that Ford must bridge. This becomes especially relevant since the 1.5 diesel TDCi EcoSport will be the only engine option in the entire lineup to get all 4 variants: Ambiente, Trend, Titanium and Titanium Plus. So there is a chance to get aggressive and notch up the sales. It's got to be the diesel that's got to do it. Here's hoping that Ford India sees it that way. Prices next week will definitely be worth looking out for.